coaches, and of course the parents who support the We the People program. That's very important to us. But before we begin, would you please introduce yourselves to us?
Good morning. We are Reno High's Unit 2. My name is Nicole Flagus, and I will be attending the University of Southern California in the fall.
My name is Michael Huang. I will be attending University of Denver.
My name is Brooke Erickson. I will be attending the University of Nevada.
My name is Trevor Livingston, and I will be attending Middlebury College.
My name is Reagan Dryling. I will be attending Willamette University. Our teacher is Mr. Richard Clark, and our coach is Lieutenant Colonel Scott Marriott.
And we'll introduce ourselves. My name is Madeline Dunn. I'm National Register Coordinator and Historian for Delaware.
Good morning. My name is Larry Winthrop. I'm a judge on the Arizona Court of Appeals.
Good morning. Jim McKenna, Adjunct Professor WPI.
I see with all those smiles, you're ready to begin. All right. Unit 2. The question of the day is number 1. Evaluate the claim that the Northwest Ordinance, 1787, was the most significant measure passed by the Confederation Congress. What provisions of the Northwest Ordinance foreshadowed the Bill of Rights? In what ways did the Northwest Ordinance serve as a template for the addition of other territories acquired by the United States in the 19th and 20th centuries? Please begin.
In his book, Culture and Imperialism, Edward W. Said asserts, just as none of us is outside or beyond geography, none of us is completely free from the struggle over geography. That struggle is complex. It is not only about soldiers and cannons, but about ideas, about forms, about images and imagines. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 was America's first advance not only into the Western Territory, but also into the concepts of federalism and the safeguarding of rights.
The Northwest Ordinance of 1787 laid out the process to establish Republican forms of government and create states. It was the most significant of 3 major measures, alongside the Treaty of Paris of 1783 and Thomas Jefferson's Land Ordinance of 1785 that were passed by the Congress under the Articles of Confederation.
The Treaty of Paris delineated the boundaries between U.S. and British territories and agreed that the Confederation Congress urged states to return confiscated property of the Loyalists. Although the treaty acknowledged the United States as free, sovereign, and independent, its downfall was the same as that of the Articles of Confederation. It could merely suggest provisions to the states, but could not enforce them.
The Land Ordinance determined the manner in which the territory east of the Mississippi would be surveyed, divided, and sold to the people to raise revenue for the national government. It was essential in providing the mechanism for settling the territory, but it lacked political provisions, which the Northwest Ordinance would later supply.
The Northwest Ordinance included 14 sections that established a Republican form of government, consisting of a governor, judges, and a General Assembly, along with 6 articles to ensure rights reserved to the people and protections from the government. According to Section 13, new states were to be on equal footing with the original states, thus providing that new states would be represented and would vote in the same way as established states.
Because the U.S. government divided up the territory and delineated the process of becoming a state, the ordinance implied that the national government would already be supreme to any states that may arise out of these territories, essentially establishing the federal system. While the ordinance is renowned for its implementation of Republican government and federalism, perhaps its most groundbreaking contribution is the precedent it set for establishing rights.
The writers of the ordinance drew from George Mason's Virginia Declaration of Rights, including in the ordinance in Article 1, the right to free exercise of religion, and in Article 2, the right to a trial by jury, the right to due process and just compensation, no cruel and unusual punishments, and no excessive fines. These provisions foreshadowed the First,
5th,
6th,
7th,
and 8th Amendments.
Because the Confederation Congress and not the states established rights in the territory, there was precedent for Congress to implement what would become the National Bill of Rights.
The Northwest Ordinance's influence extended far beyond 1787, for it served as a template for how territories would apply for statehood, as well as a precedent for eliminating slavery in the 19th century. All future land purchases, including the Louisiana and the Gadsden, would be subordinate to the direction of the central government and would have equal footing with the other states, as affirmed by the 1845 case Pollard's Lessee v. Hagan.
However, unlike the Northwest Territory, slavery was not outlawed in other Western expansions, so Southern politicians called for a balance of 1 slave state for every free state, initiated by the Missouri Compromise of 1820. The Compromise of 1850 and the Kansas-Nebraska Act were also reactions to the slavery question, as new states were added to the Union, ultimately setting the stage for the Civil War.
The addition of new territories also ushered in an era of American imperialism that continued through the 20th century. The Northwest Ordinance was the first in a series of organic established territories in the United States. It was also the template for the Enabling Acts, which allowed territories to petition for statehood. Under this system, Nevada was admitted as a territory, and then as a state. And it is under this system that current territories, such as Guam and Puerto Rico, can petition for statehood. Thank you.
I want to follow up on your comment about equal footing. How important, or was it important in your view, that new states were to be admitted under this ordinance on an equal basis with the existing states?
Because the Articles of Confederation didn't have a supremacy clause like our Constitution does in Article 6, it was necessary for the national government to assert that it was above all other states. So by having all states enter on equal footing and saying that new states formed from the territory will be at the same level as other states, and thus the national government, which is already above the other states, will also be above the new states. So it was, in a way, a supremacy clause for the Articles of Confederation.
Additionally, this equal footing clause came in with our own state. When we were established during the Civil War, we needed to have that equal footing and that vote within Congress for the Union to be preserved and to ultimately go to war. So equal footing had to be established with each addition of the state through up to the 50 states we have today.
Why do you think the Confederation Congress was able to prohibit slavery, whereas the Congress under the Constitution didn't have that power?
Under the Articles of Confederation, the states were able to initiate the Northwest Ordinance and abolish slavery just because the southern states did not want competition, because if they had allowed slavery in the Northwest Territory, then that would have conflicted with their economic interests.
The committee for drafting the Northwest Ordinance was also held by a majority of the southern states, and they wanted to do so because it was a compromise between the North and the South to get Southerners to move into the Northern Territory to oppose the abolitionists, while also keeping plantation owners in the South to keep the economy in the South growing.
Additionally, when the Constitution was created, they didn't have a way to, or they weren't able to abolish slavery in the Constitution because it would have applied to all of the states in the Union and not just this Northwest Territory that the ordinance applied to. And the Southerners would not have, or the Southern states would not have ratified the Constitution had it outlawed slavery.
Additionally, it included a Fugitive Slave Act, which would make the slaves return to their territory, and based on purely agricultural basis, these northern states were not the type of culture to raise slaves in, essentially. So the inclusion of this clause was essentially the compromise.
Do you agree with the claim made that the Northwest Ordinance that religion, morality, and knowledge are necessary to good government? Why? Why not?
During the time period, religion was very, very important. So I would say that during that time period, religion, education, and were very important because they established, religion established the moral principles in which basically the state citizens would go upon, and education was also important because they need to think logically and reasonably.
Thomas Jefferson asserted that the best way to avoid tyranny is to enlighten the minds of the public as a whole, and therefore I do believe that education is critical in good government because if people are not educated, there's no possible way that they can run their government, and after all, it is a government of the people.
Adding on to my colleague Brooks' point, Georgia delegate Abraham Baldwin once said the distinguishing happiness of free governments very much depends upon forming the minds and morals of its citizens.
Education was also important to the founders as they included the electoral college system of electing a president. They did not trust the mob rule in the minds of the people to elect a president because they would not be informed. So they wanted an educated elite separated from politics to elect a president instead.
What were the conditions that needed to be met under the Northwest Ordinance in order for a territory to become a state?
A population of 60,000 people had to be included, and they had to also establish a Republican form of government for them to then apply for statehood. But they had to submit that to the Congress to establish as a state. It wasn't automatic.
Additionally, under the land ordinance, each township was to be divided up, and there were sections reserved for schools. So this idea of education was upheld in the land ordinance, which carried on to the Northwest Ordinance when the territories would become states.
However, according to Article 2 of the Northwest Ordinance, 5,000 inhabitants were also necessary to set up a territorial government.
How justified were the fears of Americans that Spain and England were trying to gain control of the Northwest Territory?
Well, the Northwest Territory was ceded after the Revolution in the Treaty of Paris, in which several states, or United States, had to give up their territories as well as British and French states. British and French countries had to give up their territories. However, the idea that these countries would come back and try to take back their land was justified, especially as we saw that the British government didn't go away after the revolution, but they kept trying to come back and assert control, as seen in the War of 1812.
Additionally, it's seen with when the Confederacy did come about during the Civil War. They originally were looking for allies with the British, so it was a constant threat for another 50, 60, 70 years. So their fears were definitely justified.
Under the Articles of Confederation, the states were too weak to defend themselves against any country's invasion. So going with Montesquieu's spirit of laws, a large republic would fail in that aspect because they would be too weak to do anything for themselves.
Finally, the idea of a government dividing up land and then giving it to its citizens was first found in the 1783 petition from the soldiers in the Continental Army to the Confederation Congress to give them those North lands as the Confederation Congress did not have enough funds to repay them. And these Confederation soldiers were still there on that territory on the Western Front defending against the British and the Indians.
Under the Northwest Ordinance, what would be? I used to like our timekeeper. Well, that was a very nice presentation. I really enjoyed the opening statement in the way in which you just methodically followed through with your responses to the follow-up question. You chronicled events, you had historic context. Some things that really impressed me that we have not heard today was the reference to the Organic and Enabling Acts. That was really quite impressive. And not only did you state that, but you talked about the specific territories that were impacted, Guam and Puerto Rico. I just like the way you correlated everything and balanced it.
I certainly agree with that, and I really appreciated that she sort of distinguished that the Act created rights that were reserved to the people, and also identified protections from the government and how those work together. Established a Republican form of government in the new areas. So that was a very well organized presentation, with opening and answering questions. You displayed confident knowledge in the subject area.
Thank you.
I could not agree more. That was fantastic. It clearly went back and on that question about education. Well, Thomas Jefferson didn't touch on this book. He had it. I told Montesquieu, you're exactly